There is a new two-part documentary that's now showing on HBO. You can catch it on HBO. You can catch it on HBO Go. If you live in the United States, you can watch it on Max. It's called Wise Guy, David Chase, and The Sopranos. This is obviously released in conjunction with the 25th anniversary of The Sopranos. And mind you, on HBO itself, there are multiple documentaries about The Sopranos that speak to various cast members about the experiences of the show. And rightly so. I mean, The Sopranos, if you've never seen it, was absolutely fucking revolutionary. It was one of the greatest things on TV. If it wasn't for The Sopranos, there wouldn't be Mad Men or Breaking Bad or a host of what we now call premium television. Not because the writers wouldn't have written it, but because studios felt a lot more comfortable taking the risk. And mind you, it took HBO a long time to pull the trigger on Sopranos as well, because no one could quite understand what it was, because there was nothing quite like it on television. I mean, here was a show about the mafia, ostensibly about the mafia, but actually not really. And it was about this guy who was having anxiety attacks and going to see a shrink. And it was about the relationship with his mother. And it was all this stuff that you just didn't see on television at the time. Bahir and I both watched this documentary and we were kind of blown away because it actually told us a lot of stuff that we never knew about the show, because it focused in on the creator, David Chase. And I honestly had no idea how much of David Chase was in this show.
Yeah.
Like, you know how they always say, write what you know? He was writing what he knew.
He was also able to find a room of writers who knew to write what they knew. And they're similar, almost similar experiences. I will say the documentary does not put David Chase's mother in good light, but I guess The Sopranos doesn't either.
No, it does not.
I thought this was a very good documentary in that it wasn't a David Chase cradle to grave moment.
No.
It is the story of David Chase through the lens of The Sopranos.
Let's be fair. Only someone like Alex Gibney can pull this off, because there is a real cleverness in which this documentary and this story is told. Now, Alex Gibney is the one who was also responsible for the Steve Jobs documentary. He also did The Inventor. He also did the Enron documentary.
If you haven't seen Going Clear, his Scientologist documentary, that was so good.
That was so good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Alex Gibney has a fantastic framing device for this, in which he gets David Chase to sit down in a room that is very similar to the therapist's office in The Sopranos. And the way he conducts the interview as he's talking to Chase feels like therapy, because he's like, tell me about your past.
Yeah.
What was your relationship like with your mother and father? And I'm just like, whoa, this is clever. It's cunning. And it's a really interesting way to get to the heart of who David Chase is and what inspired him to create this show.
Again, like I said, it's not about David Chase, right? It's about David Chase's relationship with The Sopranos. It's not a story about how David Chase got his first break into television, although they did go into that.
They touch on that, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not where David Chase went to school. It's none of that stuff. All that's not important, because here we're talking about The Sopranos. That is what we're celebrating.
But also, I liked that they still found the time to go into the nitty-gritty detail of how the show was made. Like, right down to how they were shooting it, their points of inspiration, all of the casting.
The casting tapes were great.
Steve Van Zandt was supposed to be Tony Soprano, like from the E Street Band. I was like, what the fuck?
I think what was interesting about that is, and this is, for me, really good entertainment documentary filmmaking, because you almost never see the road not taken.
Because nobody wants to talk about that, right?
And in a lot of ways, you're watching this documentary and they go through all the people they had auditioned for Tony Soprano, and you're like, yeah, none of these guys made it. I'm so sorry for you guys. If you were just better in that room, maybe you would be, in the position of a Gandolfini kind of thing. I thought that all of that was valuable insight, because it shows that a producer isn't just the guy to count the money at the end of the day, because they have to make the magic. They have to ensure that the right person is cast for the role. And sometimes they screw up, right? Like Drea De Matteo gets 2 bites at the apple in The Sopranos, because she shows up as a hostess at a restaurant in an early episode and then comes back as a completely different character and everybody just sort of wings it. And I think all of that was probably not the point of this documentary, but it is an insight into the process of making a TV show.
And I think that's one of the most fascinating things about this particular documentary, because you learn so much about what it takes to make a TV show, and a TV show like this one. How you deal with cast members who are a little diva, how you deal with cast members who maybe have their own struggles, like James Gandolfini himself.
That bit about James Gandolfini being potentially a little bit diva, I think in hindsight, a lot of these guys are just looking back at the situation and going, look, he was going through some shit.
He was experiencing fame and attention unlike anything else.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah, I mean, he probably already had a predilection for certain things, but it's not just the fame and the attention, but also the fact that this is a character that he had to be. You know, he was talking about how he had to slap himself around a couple of times to get into the mood for a scene, right? This is not an easy character to be. And I think all of that wraps itself up into what kind of happens to him later on. And at that time may seem like just diva behavior because the lead actor doesn't want to show up and perform today, doesn't want to come in and do his 20 minutes of lines. It's actually a lot more than that. It's actually him having to deal with not only his inner demons, but having to tap into those inner demons to be the best version of the character that he can be.
Yeah, I mean, he was going through some stuff. There were times when he wouldn't show up on set. However, James Gandolfini was also the nicest person in the world. When he had negotiated this blockbuster $1 million per episode contract, he gave every cast member $30,000 to make up for the fact that they didn't negotiate a great contract.
Yeah.
Like, you almost never hear stories like that. And he was genuinely a great human being, but he had his issues.
Yeah.
And I think what David Chase makes very clear is that all of these characters feel like surrogates to him, if not other people in his life. And I think that's really interesting because no one in the studio system could understand that.
Yeah.
Like, people were passing on the show for the stupidest of reasons. I think CBS passed on it because he didn't like the fact that Tony Soprano took Prozac.
Yeah.
And they just had this idea of what the mafia was or what the mob was, and no one could see beyond the stereotypes and cliches of what a mafia TV show should be. And I think The Sopranos broke that mold.
There's that fear from an executive to greenlight something like this that would cost a lot of money to make for people to not tune in and turn up for it. The Sopranos in a lot of ways is, for me at least, feels like one of the earliest shows that gave us that villain as a lead for your TV show kind of guy. The people we follow are always the good guys, from the cowboy shows to the cop shows. And in cinema, maybe they've gone down the route of the slightly more questionable characters.
Because you only spend 2 hours with them.
Right? And at the end of it, they die or not. And I think, and that's fine. But to spend several hours a year over the course of maybe 5, 6, hopefully 7 years, to spend your time with the villain and make that person human, make him have a mother, make him have a wife, make him have 2 children, make him have a daughter that he has to take around to universities, and oh, by the way, kill a snitch along the way. That was strange. We see that now. No big deal, right? The Shield, Breaking Bad, even you said Mad Men. These characters are only able to exist because we had Tony Soprano.
And also, that was a great moment where they explained the process of writing that college episode.
Yeah.
Because the studio was freaking out because here Tony was going to kill a guy in cold blood, mind you.
Because it's the first time a hero would kill a guy in cold blood, right?
David Chase felt it was absolutely essential. It was absolutely necessary because Tony Soprano was a mob boss, and mob bosses aren't cuddly guys. And so they came to an interesting compromise in which they decided to show the person that he was about to kill almost do something terrible to him. And it's interesting because that was enough. As an audience member, you go, oh, well, this guy's a fucker too. He was going to kill Tony in front of his daughter.
Yeah.
So he deserves to die. It's okay that Tony's a bad guy who did it.
Because at least Tony was not going to do it in front of his daughter.
And like that little psychological play was all it took to win the audience over. Because I remember watching that episode and I was like, yeah, fuck this guy. He's awful. He's a snitch.
You know what it is for me? I remember watching this, and I didn't watch it live. I watched it much, much too late. But when we got to that episode, I believe it was episode 5 of season 1, up to that point, Tony Soprano is just a guy. Yes, he's a mafia.
He beats up some people. He runs a strip club.
Yeah, but like you almost can kind of just like wave it away as just like a dirty businessman.
Right. But murder is a line too far.
Oh no. Oh shit. No, wait. This guy's this kind of mafia. He's not just a dirty businessman. He's an actual mafia. He's not gonna order some guy to kill someone. He's gonna do it himself. And not just with a gun, but up close with piano wire.
Yeah.
I remember watching that going, oh shit. It was a real shift because episode 6, 7, 8 onwards later, when he goes back to the therapist's office and you go like, yeah, I know you've got a problem with your ducks in your pool, but dude, you just killed someone. Dr. Melfi doesn't know this.
And yet again, this was something I didn't notice when I first watched it because I was a lot younger and I wasn't paying that much attention to the analytics of television and the importance of certain decisions. But when they talk about Melfi being raped and that decision of whether or not to tell Tony, and she decides not to, and how powerful that was for that single character because she could not go down that path.
Yes.
Because she was literally the only noble person in this TV show.
Yeah. Except maybe the kids, but
Oh, except maybe the kids. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The way they broke that down was amazing.
But I think what was also interesting about that bit in the documentary is that Lorraine Bracco understood the significance of her character not telling Tony.
Correct.
Because once she tells Tony, she knows Tony's going to kill the guy. She knows it's going to happen. She might as well pull the trigger herself.
Yeah.
So she knows that by not doing it, she remains in control despite this horrific, horrible thing that's happened to her. And she keeps her conscience clean. She remains the good guy in this conversation. And I thought that was interesting.
There's a lot in this documentary. We learned so much. Also, it's so entertaining in its delivery. And I think a lot of credit goes to Alex Gibney, his interview technique, his editing, the way he's shot and the way he's cut this thing make it an incredibly entertaining piece of work. There are loads of juicy behind the scenes stories. And I think if you are at all interested in the process of how these things get made, if you are an aspiring filmmaker, if you are a fan of television, I think this is a must watch. Check out Wise Guy, David Chase and the Sopranos. It's now streaming on HBO. You can watch it on the app, I think on Unify TV, on Astro. There are multiple avenues for you to check this out. It is well worth your time. 2-part documentary. Each part is about 90 minutes, right, Bahir?
Yeah.
But it is absolutely engrossing. Absolutely engrossing. Check it out. Let us know what you think. You know how to reach out. Goggler MY, all of our social media feeds. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline 012-524-5208. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.